Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro office hour. Today is October the 10th, 2022, and we are on, I believe we're session 7. So we're moving right along in the course. And currently I don't have any questions on the docket, but Kendra, you are here. Did you want to chat about your site or any questions?
I mean, we can, but we don't have to. I was just listening in more or less to get ideas and see what other people had questions on. But am I the only one?
You're it. You're it.
Oh
Yep.
my gosh.
2 weeks ago it was Roman. It was just me and Roman, and this week it's you. So you've kind of got an hour of dedicated feedback or thoughts.
Oh
Or
my gosh. Well, I'm not prepared for that. um, um, let's see. I mean, I'm a little behind. I've been having issues with my shoulder surgery, like recovery. So that's why I'm like looking dead to the world. But um I kind of I was debating on going back and forth between like actually drawing it out and like doing it on the computer. On the computer it's just easier because like I can use the legend and just copy and paste. But hand drawing it out is like usually more my style. But when I go to do it, it just nothing looks right and I'm not satisfied with it. So I've been like teetering back and forth all week. But like my client interview went well. I mean, it's my mom, so I kind of had an idea of like what she was looking for. Um, my main like I guess like worries with this property is I know she doesn't want to do a ton, but I also know she wants to do better. So that's kind of I'm trying to find that happy balance between like what are some things that are achievable for her. She does have help with like my siblings and I and like my nephew. And well, I guess my sibling and I, because my other two siblings live too far away. And they just don't go up there as often. My horses are still on the property, so I'm up there fairly regularly. But yeah, so I've like kind of teetered within like the field being its separate entity of like just focusing on hay production and like what we can do there. But when it comes to this week's like assignments, I guess like that's not really what we're looking at. Like we're just doing like the base map type of thing. So, um, yeah, I don't know. um, I'm trying to think of like things I could ask you.
Yeah, well, that all sounds good. Yeah, generally when you're starting off, especially when you're starting to develop that base map,
Mm-hmm.
whatever feels the easiest is usually the best way to go. So if it feels like
Okay.
if the output of the drawing feels cumbersome or it just feels like it's really starting to create friction between you and being able to put it down on the page, then I would go with whatever's easiest. And
Okay.
if you get to an assignment, you're like, this assignment would be best hand drawn, go for it. Um, this is not a course where you're producing a professional design that you're giving to somebody, where the point of this course is to learn to grow. And so if you want to like switch back and forth because you think this one assignment makes more sense to start doing hand drawing as opposed to the
Okay.
other, then great. It's a great time to experiment and get feedback, especially on what things look like, because it's very rare to have, you know, 40 other people in a class that also are looking at your work and are also learning, plus somebody who
Yeah.
has the experience that I do to look at what you're doing and go, oh, that's interesting the way you're doing it. So you can do it either way. The reason why we made the Google Slides template the way we did is so that way it was relatively straightforward and easy, and anybody could produce something that they feel comfortable giving to a client or somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is that there's a lot of colleagues of mine after I made the template that are now using the template because it's so user friendly, and
Yeah.
the clients really like the finished product. So
Yeah, I'm super thankful for that because that was something I didn't have coming into this. Um, I just do like our stuff, like whatever we need on the homestead. If we need a chicken coop, I draw it up and build it, like that type of thing. But when it comes to like, I mean, this is kind of out of the box and stuff like that, but like when it comes to like clientele and like outreach and stuff like that, like what are some things like you do to, like when you were starting off, like how did you get there? Like,
Yeah, great question. So the thing I did was pretty unique. And basically, I took my PDC in '09 and I took it at a place called One United Resource Eco Village over on Vancouver Island, which is on the west side of British Columbia, Canada.
yeah.
And after that course, I was fired up, I was excited, but I also thought there's a better way to do courses, and there's also there's a drought of courses in the area. So I basically designed a company that would do advanced permaculture education and like-minded conversations. And what happened is, as I started to advertise for the courses, people were like, do you do design? And
Mm,
as that happened, I was able to bring in design and bring in conversations. And because I had made all these amazing colleagues and friends who were professionals in the field, the very first the very first paycheck I got from one of these designs, I gave directly to a mentor, and I said, "Hey, this is for you. Tell me how not to screw this up. Like, what do I do? What don't I do? Like, what should I be thinking about?" And he was thrilled because he'd had students for years who were like, "Hey, give me your brain for free." And here was I
yeah.
coming along, just like, I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you what I think
Yeah.
you're worth, which was more than he was used to getting, which was amazing.
Wow.
Because it's what I wanted to get paid eventually. And
Yeah.
he basically walked through the design with me. So I would think of something and I would put it down on paper and I show it to him and he'd be like, well, you should think about it this way. And he wasn't a renderer as a skill set that he came with, but he came with 25 years of experience. So I then was like, okay, what do I like to do? And so I tried to draw like every other landscape architect I ever saw, and hated it. I was just like,
Yeah.
my brain, my hand didn't connect that way. So I started making my own style with my drawings. And what was great about that is that I got really excited about drawing. So whenever I went to go draw, I got really excited for that component of the process,
Yeah.
um, which then led to doing renders and perspectives and things for other people, which was super fun. Um,
That's awesome.
and then over the years, I really got into digital design and I really got into on large scale using Google Earth Pro. So this is the neat thing about me is that I'm a regenerative land designer who also has been specializing in permaculture for a long time, which is a tool that I'm teaching through this course. But the way that I design at scale, so like I'm on a sub 1 acre property right now for a year.
Hmm.
And so it's very much different than the 400 acres I just came from. At
Yeah.
400 acres, I'm designing
That's
and working
insane.
with Google Earth Pro because it's a scalable and it works at size tool. With this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Morpholio Trace with this, which is a program I like using on urban sort of sub acre, 2 acre size, because you can really have a lot of fun with
Yeah.
Morpholio Trace, which not everybody is going to use because not everybody has an iPad and not everybody wants an iPad because it is native to iOS. Um,
Hmm.
but I love doing it because it's so much fun to draw and they have stencils. And so it's like really easy to do that sort of
Oh,
architectural rendering where you just stencil over things.
yeah.
And if you go back through the previous office hours, a couple of them will say iPad. And if you want to take a look at how I draw in there, I went
There's
through this a
those.
couple of I don't know, months ago or years ago. They all blend together at this point.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, but that's how I started. And then as I got bigger and bigger and bigger jobs, I then reached out to more adept mentors who worked at that scale. So recently, I had the opportunity to look at a 6,500 hectare farm project in Uganda that came through a colleague of mine. And they came because they knew I had worked at scale before and I wasn't scared of it, basically.
Yeah.
Like once you
Which
understand the
it is
process,
intimidating.
yeah, for sure. But once you understand the process, you're just walking the entire site through that step-by-step process. And you're just like, okay, well, what's the climate data that we have? What's the geography data? So what kind of topographical information? And then you're going through and you're rendering that topographic information, which there's a bit in this course, but generally I follow the keyline scale of permanence for all things agricultural, as well as PA Yeoman's keyline farm design system, which is taking ridges, taking valleys, and marking them off. And then between the ridge and the valley, it's just like a roof pitch. You have what's called a
Yeah.
land unit. And so that land unit, if you think of it this way, that land unit has a finite amount of precipitation it receives. And thus you can, from there, you can start to design vegetation because you've got precipitation number. You've got
Mhm.
this area is 100 square meters. This area gets 100 millimeters of rain a year. Okay, great. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 10,000 liters of water to work with per annum on this
Yeah.
property. And then you can design down from that. You can start to get a sense of what that scale and that
Yeah.
size is.
That was actually something I was like wondering with this site is like water collection,
Yeah.
which obviously at 25 acres, it's not like you're gonna want to collect too much in like buckets and carrying it across property. So like thinking of creative ways to like contain water like in the land. Um,
Can you share
um,
your portfolio link in the chat?
yeah, let
And
me
we can start to do some rough sketches and
analyze it.
designs.
Um,
Hey
I don't
Carlos,
remember
how you
how to
doing? Good
get
to see you.
there.
Hello.
So Carlos and Noah, I'm just taking whatever questions are alive right now for folks. So if you do have a specific question, I still don't see anything in that Q&A doc. Just let me know. We're going to go through Kentra's first.
Sure. Yeah. Great.
Awesome. How did
Once
you
I
like?
remember how to get it there.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'm just going to ask Noah a question. Noah, how did you like the first session of the composting toilets course?
Good. I enjoyed it. I had done some of the reading. I've been working on the homework a bit, trying to figure out where everything goes and or at least what the bylaws are here. But I've got to. It's late for me. I'm like a 5 a.m. riser, so I've got to make sure that next time I'm sitting at my kitchen table and have an afternoon tea, because I feel like I need to go catch the last maybe 10 minutes of the recording. As I started dozing out of it. But yeah, it's been interesting. I've been curious too, like with like the thermophilic composting, like wanting to getting it super hot.
Yeah.
Would you want to do that same type of composting with like your basic like composter backyard kitchen waste and stuff as well? You don't worry about like killing off the bacteria culture or?
Yeah. So generally if you're doing thermophilic compost, you're going to want to go through the thermophilic and the mesophilic. You're going to want to go through the hot and the middle.
Medium hot.
Yeah. And so when we're making, let's say, activated compost or living compost to then apply on a gardenscape, be it perennials or be it annuals, generally what we're going to do is we're going to purchase a compost thermometer and we're going to monitor, I'm going to give you best case scenario, knowing full well that I don't do this unless I'm making compost for sale, unless somebody's like, hey, I need a compost for sale. And we're working with microscopy technician who's actually looking at the microscope, taking a look at the organism count, and we're actually breeding a specific type of compost to ameliorate some issue, right? Yeah. So generally what we're doing is we're checking for 58 degrees Celsius, because if it reaches 60, you get a massive die-off of population. So we're basically trying to halt before 60, which means there's a couple things we can do, but generally it means turning it. So if you get to 58, outside becomes inside, inside becomes outside. So you take the outside off, you take the inside, that becomes the outside, and then you do it again. You basically allow it to come back up to temperature, and then it basically bioturbates. All the little organisms kind of chew through everything and start to homogenize that material. So yeah, with almost all material, we'll do it that way if we're thermophilic composting. We can also do what's called trench composting or slow composting, which is basically, let's fill a trench up with a whole bunch of material that is still proud of ground, so that way there is some airflow, because that's the problem when you start to get subground, is that you don't get any airflow. Now we've likely gone anaerobic.
Well, I just even wonder if because I have a 3-bin composter in my backyard that I use, and that's the one thing I find is like I'll just end up turning it just because I find that I've got sort of like a chicken wire all around it to get as much airflow in, but I find some of those under layers as they get down start to get a bit anaerobic if I don't turn it regularly. I've been experimenting with like tapping in some like
tubing.
PVC tubing, with air venting in there. So I've got an opportunity in the next little bit. I have a friend of mine who part of why I've been really enjoying the composting toilet course, but they own a horse farm. And so I have basically the opportunity because they're paying someone to haul away their horse poops. I'm like, well, stop that. Let me come out there and give me a little chunk of land to start an orchard, and I'll compost it all for for you and kind of create a nice symbiotic relationship there. So
That's awesome.
want to make sure, yeah, because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm working with this other farmer too, and I'm trying to change him from like get him off his tilling system, like organic farmer and plastics, into more of this. So I'm like, his biggest step back is tons of compost. So I'm like, right, 2 birds, 1 stone. Hopefully everyone's gonna win.
Well, and aged horse manure is my favorite way to start a garden. So
that's what you're saying about 2 years with the dewormer and stuff.
Yeah. So as long as 2 to 3 years has elapsed, or you're starting to see weed growth that's coming in with that horse manure, then you're good to go. And at that point, you're basically putting down some sort of mulch, or some sort of weed barrier. So like cardboard or wood or newspaper, putting on that horse manure, and then putting on a mulch, and then planting directly into it. Like we have jump started gardens from zero to full growth within a few months just doing that.
Well, that's what I was thinking. My question, so when you do the horse manure compost, would you do just horse manure, or would you start to add in, if you could, like more green stuff to balance nitrogen and carbon content?
See, the great thing is that horse manure is very balanced. So
it is all right.
Yeah. So like it's the one manure that requires composting for sure. It's not like alpaca or rabbit that you can apply directly into the garden.
Right on there.
And it's not like chicken or pig or cow, which generally you want to decompose because it's too nitrogen rich. It's kind of perfectly balanced, but it does need like a year or 2. So I wouldn't add anything to it unless for some reason the output you wanted to specifically target something that was a deficiency in the area you were planting.
Okay, no, I was just curious. I wasn't sure with that, if there was a bit of straw content or straw or wood chips. I'm not sure what they use in there, if it would just be more usually carbon. I wanted to add the nitrogen, but sweet.
Yeah, usually straw or bedding or things like that nature, because they'll usually like clean out the stalls or the bedding. Like in my place, we had 10 years of feeding in the same area in winters. And so we took 12 dump trucks out, and that became the material that I left for a year, just one more year to check, even though it had been there for 10. I've had problems with dewormers before, and I've seen gardens just stop because we put in horse manure that had dewormer in it. And then in year 1, I've got a bunch of Instagram posts and everything about this. We had phenomenal production, to the point to where my friends were like, "You're not allowed to call that a year 1 garden. You've been at this for too long." But that's the great thing about prep, is like, if you think about it in advance, like, okay, site prep is almost half the battle, because if you prep well, the moment you put in your trees, the moment you put in your seeds, everything's taking off, because it has the nutrition, it has the biology, it has the water, and it has the sun. It has all of that. And then if you're conscientious to say, okay, if you preconceive, what are my pests that I might have to deal with? Then you've got that next stage. For us, we had never, and the valley had never heard of locust coming in. So I wasn't adequately prepared to deal with something that completely obliterated the garden in year 3 or year 2, I can't remember. And just, raised the garden. Like 80% of the garden was gone. Leaves were gone, stems were gone, potato leaves were gone, like things that I was told locusts wouldn't eat. But it was a really dry spring, and dry springs basically mean that there's no water that drowns out the larvae of grasshoppers. And then there's a blue fungus that usually, consumes a good portion of those grasshoppers. And grasshoppers are small, soft, and green and solitary. And then if there's too much serotonin in them, which is propagated from a very dry spring and a lot of sun, they metamorphosize into like 3 times their length, brown, orange, hard body, gregarious, and they eat like, I think it's like 10 times their body weight every single day. And that's how you get these locust swarms. So I wasn't prepared for that, because I didn't think of it in the possibilities. But it's one of those things, as you're in this work for another year, you're like, all possibilities are possibilities. That's why they're called possibilities. So you have to be prepared for everything from every angle.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Kendra get onto her project there. I'm excited to too.
Kendra, do we got your link?
I think so. I updated it to that file, but I don't know. It doesn't say it's a live document, but I can send it to you, and then
can you just put it in the chat?
Oh yeah. Let me copy it here. Might take me a
Love it.
Where is the Kendra's site?
Kendra, where's your site?
I am working on typing it in. I need to get like a webcam for my desktop. And so I'm like on my phone, but all my stuff is here.
Oh, okay.
So
Well,
I
yeah,
have to like physically type.
if email's easier, and I can quickly jump into the class and see if I can grab it.
Here, I just sent it over to you.
Okay.
Perfect. So it should have went to like the inbox.
The Canvas inbox?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 Sorry.
No worries. Takes a little bit of time to get everything together. And the course is so big and there's so many moving parts. So I get it. It says I need access. So you're going to have to go to share settings. When you click on share, you'll have to then go to the anybody with link can view is probably the one you'll want to give me.
Let me copy it real quick again.
No worries.
Okay, try that one.
Cool.
No, it was good with the horse compost because that's something I'm curious into.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
I think I grew up on a horse farm, and I'm telling my mom, I'm like, man, we've just wasted so much of our time and resource. We just shoveled that shit for years, and we did nothing with it. Could have been selling it off.
Oh, it's liquid gold to me. Or
I actually haul it like 2.5 hours to my house because I started like collecting like a pile that I'm like, I come up and I rotate and I bring down to my garden.
Oh, that's good. Well, especially thinking 50 pounds a day per horse is a lot of manure.
Okay. Yeah. I remember your site now.
Oh, right, here we are.
Yeah. So you were conversing a little bit about what to do with the different areas. Was that your thought there?
So I was thinking like with trying to like, because this site is pretty level for the most part, where the trees are like that forest, majority of that behind the property line got clear cut last year. Okay. And but that's the highest point of elevation. So I'm thinking that like the water is not going to travel the same way it was. It didn't seem to affect the hay production like this year, but that's where most of the water comes from into the field. So like thinking about how to protect that field and like conserve water or collect water is kind of what we were talking about before.
Okay, so this would be High Point, yeah?
What is the address? What is the address? I'm going to pull it up on a contour map.
1514 Rogers Road, Fairview, Michigan. And that's the other thing. I'm not able to find like a ton of like even maps just on this location because it's so rural, or like the websites are so outdated. I'm getting stuff from like, I got a bunch of stuff from like the 80s and I was like, how is that on here and nothing else is?
Well, let me just pull it up on Contour Map Creator because it's
that's what I've got on right here.
It's okay. This is the thing. So I say this every single semester, and I think it's in a tutorial, but basically the data that comes off of any of the online contour map generators, paid for or not, all comes from the same data, which was Google Earth. NASA flew this mission in 2001 or 2000 called the Shuttle Radar Topographic Mission, SRTM. And they shot LiDAR of the entire planet. And each one of their pixels was 30 meters, which means that if your site has sub 30 meter elevation difference, then the computer interpolated your site and guessed at what the resolution was. So guessed what the topographic is, which means who knows what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so I have something that's popped up here.
I've done that contour map for my site and then the farm, and it's not too far off from my experience.
Oh
on
yeah.
there. Yeah,
Okay.
Here we are.
because it shows me per foot, but it seems to be fairly good.
Okay, so I'm just gonna export this. I'm gonna go. You work in feet, right?
Me?
Yeah.
I homestead now.
No, you work in imperial
Oh,
measurements.
feet.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was like, what? That was a change of question. Yes, I do. I'm like, what does that have to do with anything?
Do you work in your feet?
I know. I do work on my feet constantly. This whole like recovery process has been like miserable. I haven't left the house and I am itching.
Too funny. Okay, so I've got the data in there, and we're just going to use in feet, and then we're going to export the data. And then there we go, redraw contours. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it okay. So I'm going to punch in, and then I think I'm just going to copy this as a screenshot. And you can export this as well. All right. Pull this up, and then we'll share this, and then we'll do some drawing on this. So the blue is low and the red is high in terms of that contour. So here's your site as interpolated by this program.
Okay.
And generally, does that look right to you? Is the northeastern corner the lowest and the southwestern the highest?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
At the like where that road disappears to the south, there's like a massive hill like right there. And so like this is all kind of down in like a valley, but it's relatively flat. Like
okay. Yeah, well, I set it for foot contour. So basically we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So basically 6 feet drop between the southwestern corner and the northeastern corner.
Okay.
Is what it's telling me. So I'm curious if that's, anywhere close to what your experience is.
Yeah. Because what I had found was where that tree line was where the highest point was, but I didn't like back it up to include that hill that's out at the end of the road either. But my main concern is making sure like that clear cutting isn't going to affect her property.
Mm-hmm. And basically this has all been removed.
Will.
All this forest has been removed.
Not on her property, but behind it, like everything like to the east of that.
Okay. And then
of those, yeah.
And then her property, taking a look at this from just memory, is kind of this. Is that right?
Yeah, a little lower on the north, but yeah, and actually further across to the right about there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically all of the forest to the east of this, basically this area here has been removed.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And generally you were saying that the water's coming in
like that's this. Yep, right where your mouse, like your cursor was for that arrow. That's like where probably the most like puddles or like water collection is.
Okay.
Like that big flat spot there, like the most space between the contour.
Yeah, very, very flat. Okay. And what generally are the design goals or criteria from the client?
For the most part, she has no idea about like what she wants for the field. She just wants hay production. Because since her paddocks are so small, which I'm like planning to like rework some of her fencing to expand and like have pasture rotation. That way those like paddocks can like regenerate a little bit quicker because they're not right now at all. It's mainly just dirt and like duckweed. But with that, taking away some of the field for pasture, I want to make sure that like her hay supply doesn't go under. So that's kind of why like I'm looking at the field as a separate entity and
Okay.
like
And
approaching
why
it
does
as
she
a
want
whole.
hay production? Does she raise animals or does she have horses?
For the
Or
horses,
for
yeah.
the horses?
So like my 2 are up there and she has 2 of her own. So all of that field comes right back at for like winter hay food, like feed. But because her pastures aren't like regenerating fast enough, she's feeding hay year round now.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to like balance that out with like redesigning how the pastures are, adding like expanding them a little bit, and then with that field with the topsoil, like trying to, because it used to be, what the heck was it? It was corn and sunflowers. They'd rotate every other year before she got the property. I think she's had it for quite a while, 7 years or so.
Could you do some sort of like electric fencing and then like rotate the horses so that they're not just being in one spot, but just keep putting them in different places over the property?
That's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, to an extent, like, because they need a shelter of some sort. You can't like house them in like a field without like water and a shelter legally in Michigan. So I'm looking at redesigning like a barnyard area in between the 2 barns that are currently on the property that have separate entrances to different paddocks. So that way you can open a gate and close off another one, and then they don't even have to go in there. Yeah, but that's expanding those out into the field to do it, because right now with 4 horses, it's too small of a space. That's all there is to it.
And would you guys be okay putting them like for part of the paddock, like in that treed area, or is it too dense maybe?
There's actually barbed wire out there. It's like embedded in the trees from like the old farmers where they like pulled the barbed wire fences to like make this hay field, and they just like literally left it in the woods. So the trees are kind of out of like the question, because I was even looking at where she's got like some of those trailers, that like open space back there. I was like, well, that's not being utilized, but even that I guess has a lot of barbed wire in it. So I was looking to like bring it out like into the field, because where the pastures are now, the overlook isn't, I mean, you can see it kind of, but those pastures are like outdated on that map that's on the screen. She has like some that come out a little bit further past that second barn, but I'm thinking of pushing it into the field, and even possibly like out here by the road where there's that square parcel, trying to utilize that more for them too.
How many bales are you getting off of the 25 acres?
So after last year, we did like the organic fertilizer round, she doubled and she got 48 bales off of it last year. So that was super, super good. And that was the first time she had done anything to try to like benefit the topsoil.
And how long does 48 bales last you through the winter with 4 horses?
That lasts about all year, because she's feeding all year round now.
Okay, so she's not pasturing the horses at all, she's feeding.
No, she can't, because the fields aren't, or the pastures aren't making, like producing anything for them to really munch on. There's probably a little bit, but not enough to sustain them.
This vertical line, is this a fence line or a drive line?
It's the old marker for where the property line was. But there was an easement put in on the north side next to the road. You'll see there's like a little driveway. So her property is just south of that driveway. That's where like that property line is. And so like they worked an easement out originally, and then finally the guy behind her was like, hey, I'll give you this section of my field if I can have that strip and we don't have an easement anymore. So that was like the original property line where the fence ran, that barbed wire fence that they took out.
And what's the wind like on the property?
It comes from that west side across, and because that's a whole field off to the west there, and it's probably just as big as this one. And I feel like there might be some northerly winds based on like what I've done in like my reading or like
Mm-hmm.
or my research. But for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, it's mainly just western winds because it just breaks right through there.
And what time of year generally are you getting those westerlies?
Spring and then like the first like bit of winter
So
is
basically
where
on
it's the
equinox. Okay. And is everything about these 25 acres to support those horses? Is that the main?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That is literally all she does. Is she rides.
Perfect. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so there's a couple things that immediately come off as possibles. You're in Michigan. About how many
Mhm.
months are winter?
Probably close to maybe 6 to 7,
6 to
if
7.
not a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It really depends. And up there, like the winters are a lot more harsh compared to like, because I'm in like I'm down by like Flint, like the middle of the belt, like an hour
Okay.
north of Detroit.
Yeah.
And her and I have like a 4 week gap between like when my first frost is versus her first frost, where she's ahead of me.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things here. I think one, the long reaching goal, like the longest goal, should be to start to develop some perennial pastures on the southern side of the property. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Perennial pastures is a concept that was popularized and coined by Colin Seis, Seis. Colin's out of Australia. And over the years, he started to seed drill, stopped cutting, and basically was drilling seed into his pastures to develop more and more diverse perennial pastures. So that way there was
Mm-hmm.
always at least 3 to 9 different types of cereal grains or forbs or herbaceous material that the animals could eat. What was amazing about Colin is that he realized that nobody else was doing this, so he started to capture the seed from this and then started to make his own
Mm-hmm.
seed blends and develop that long term. Um, so I would say if you could put anywhere between 5 to 8 acres into perennial pasture and manage those in pasture rotation, like
Mm-hmm.
Noah was talking about, close to the zone 1 area, the zone 2 area. So that way the horses are easily led to gated systems. So that way they've got an area and potentially even
Yeah.
all in some sort of radial. So that way they're all generally close to this forested area. What is this forested area like understory?
Just like random shrubs. It's mainly basswood, like big
Okay.
mature basswoods.
Okay.
But it's just like shrubbage. I don't know
Okay.
exactly the vegetation because I haven't been able to drive up there yet.
Gotcha.
I still got to get that okay.
Okay. So there's a couple of ways to go about this. If you work with radial design, that means that you've got a hub and spoke system. So that way there's basically a barnyard that has spokes that comes off of it with different paddocks that you can then move animals
Hmm.
into. Um, there's pros and cons to it. There's usually irregular shapes of your paddock system, but on the other side, it's easy to manage from a centralized location. So if you
Yeah.
need to bring the animals in and move them back out, you can basically have a place. And generally having vegetative covers usually better for animals than it is having barns. So if we've got
Hmm.
that ability, then fantastic. The other nice thing about pasture cropping is that you're usually not cutting the grain. So what happens is you get this huge amount of growth, because let's say we've got 4 or 5 paddocks and you're moving them through. Chances are when winter hits, paddock 1 you're not getting back to, or whatever that rotation is. Once you get a good a helping of snow on there, you can actually train horses to go out and forage under snow for those grains that are still under snow. So you can start to
Hmm.
develop more of their innate pawing activity to get under the snow and to find some of those grains. What's amazing about those grains, and this was figured out by a wildfire biologist, is that this is what generally kept the elk herds alive in Alberta. So basically,
Hmm.
all of these native grasses, they would go into a little bit of fermentation after the snow falled on them, and they would start to increase their amount of protein. Same thing we do with silage.
Wow.
Um, and it was one of the reasons the elks were on the plains. Now, once you start to remove that and go into grain production and cut everything down in the fall, there's no reason for the elk to be there. So of course the elk get pushed into the forest. The forest is where the wolves are, and all of a sudden you have a reduction of elk population, which was this amazing circuitous route of how he came to this conclusion and figured it all out. So I would say if there's interest in that, that would be important. One of the major things you're going to want to focus on, if that's the case, is you're going to want to start to focus on shelter belts. So wind can take up to 40% of an animal's body weight every year because of that cooling effect. And so even if you only started on creating a vegetative shelter belt in and around that area for, let's say, that lower section. Just going to put this to, yeah, there we go. So even if you started to work on this section here, let's say, and really started to develop something in this pattern, this process, I think you'd be pretty far along. Now, depending on their ability to see an outcome over an aesthetic that is usually grid patterned, if there's water coming in here, generally my thought process is, how can we spread that across landscape? So is there a way, shape, or form to collect this water and to move it in some kind of way, shape, or form? Or can we do both, in that, is there a way to create some kind of water impoundment, some kind of dugout, because you're in a pretty flat area, so it would be a dugout of some sort, and then with some kind of swale that comes across to basically capture any sort of overland flow. Now, the great thing about this is what you will develop over time is you'll develop more of an alleyway cropping system. Now, the two major obstacles to this are the climate between the ears, which is probably the hardest, is when you're working with people who work with machinery and have been doing it for a long time. They like big squares because they don't have to think. So they go up one road, down another, and you can see the haying pattern over the years.
Yeah.
What this does, unfortunately, is it would cut up the pasture into a more irregular shape, which generally tractor operators don't enjoy.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
the
And
water,
this is just like a local farmer that they have like a verbal agreement with, and he gets all the second cutting for his cows. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So the pitch to him is that what you're doing is you're increasing the water holding capacity of the site. And at the same time, that water holding capacity will have a positive downslope effect. So, this area here, I could see almost right away being put into some kind of shelter belt. And in Michigan, the extension agents are really good about starting to help out farmers with shelter belt programs, providing seedlings, doing an installation project. And there tends to be quite a bit from the NRCS to do granting upon that. And the Savannah Institute, who's largely, the biggest agroforestry outfit down the States, has recently just secured, I think, $1 million research grant, which is then supported by a number of other grants to allow their findings to go into farmer-led projects. So there's an opportunity there to take some of that money and put it into good use. If this water comes up any higher, what you may end up doing, and again, these are radical ideas to people who have been on a tractor for years. So I say this with a grain of salt, not saying that you will be able to get this passed, but if I had these design criteria, this is what I would be taking a look at, that there might be a further opportunity to create, doesn't have to be this line. This is all, brainstorming. There may be another opportunity to create some kind of water capture and storage above this, and that helps to demarcate what those perennial pastures would look like. At that point, then you can start to, walk the shelter belt further down, further down, further down, further down, further down. And what's amazing about shelter belts is that they have an effective distance that's 10 times their height. So if you have a 10-foot high shelter belt, you have 100-foot effective distance of sheltering. If you go to 20 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet, now all of a sudden we're getting up to 1,000 feet of shelter protection that moves over landscape. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, because that was one of the questions I had, is like what would be the proper range, because that's such a wide space to cover. How is that going to benefit just in that one spot? Is that going to support too, with trying to hold some of the heat into the ground for winters and stuff like that?
100%. So that north America and the Northern Hemisphere, the major thing we deal with is wind. Everyone says, oh, it's the cool temperatures. It's not the case. It's
No.
the ambient wind that continually cools off the ground and then removes the heat from the soil. So basically, years ago, a colleague of mine who's an amazing mentor was producing a food forest outside of Grand Forks, British Columbia. And he started working with the Wisconsin Nut Growers Association. And these guys were getting fruiting times on their nuts half what was on the books. And Richard was consistently being like, guys, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And finally, they let him in on the secret because he proved himself over 6 years of being a dedicated grower. You know, there's old boys clubs and then there's old boys clubs. And this was the club that was basically saying, we want you to prove to us that you're serious about this because we're not giving our secrets away to just anybody. And they basically took 1,000 feet of black poly pipe. They coiled it up so it's single layer on a piece of 4x8 sheet plywood. They charged it with water, put 2 valves on either end, charged it with water in the spring, had a huge amount of heat in there. And that was their first watering of their trees after the last frost. And what this did is it activated the soil food web in and around the root zone. And all of a sudden, Richard was getting the same fruiting times. He was getting these fruiting times cut in half because they woke up the soil early. So all of that as an example to say, when we have an area that is totally denuded of forest and all we have is the winds blowing through, it desiccates animals, it desiccates plants, but it also removes all the heat that's going to be in the soil. So that way the soil wakes up early. This is why when we get little sun traps, and eventually what I would say is you would walk this along here, and you might even, I know it's heresy to people who drive tractor, but you might even walk down and you might actually start. And this is how you know this works. Because all you have to take a look at the English countryside.
Yeah.
Just look at the English countryside and the amazing work of hedgerow and hedgerow laying. Once you have these little paddocks, they become calms in the storm and their production shoots up. It's remarkable the amount of production that comes from this.
Kind of what like I was looking at is like, how can this like just maximize? Because right now it's just getting completely torn apart during those like windy months. And even like when we do have like strong storms, because there's like power outages like in this area constantly. But when we do have those strong storms, like even like the hay crop gets like a little bit damaged because it's just coming across there so harsh.
100%. So, you know, I would take a look at these kind of patterns, because when you take a look at these patterns, all of a sudden, then you get these areas of usage. You know, you get this land unit here. I don't want to use that color. You get this land unit down here, which is basically this perennial pasture area.
Yep.
Right. And then you have haying fields. Let's use a different color. Then you have haying fields, which, you know, that's going to be water line there. And then you probably get haying field 1 and haying field 2. I've done something else here, which I didn't explain. Basically, when we get any sort of drainage, we armor it with trees. And this is, you know, this is a grain of salt because this information just came from that source we talked about, but this looks generally like a valley form. So immediately when there's a valley form, I want to protect it. And it generally means that we can support some kind of tree populace. And the nice thing it does in this case is that it actually creates an internal shelter belt as well. So, you know, in this case, we'd have sort of land unit 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the great thing about designing in rooms or in areas is now that can be a focus of study in terms of what are the plants we're putting on there? What are the animals we're putting on there? What does access look like? What does egress look like? What do fences look like? Now, all of a sudden, we actually have more of a concrete idea about what this might look like. It also means that, you know, this sort of swale and pond maybe, you know, 3-4 seasons down. So this actually in season 1, we'll just put it in red. This is the full hay area, right? And again, working with people and changing ideas, it's great to go slowly and incrementally.
Yes, and they're very traditional.
For sure.
Because it's worked for them for years, you know, I get it. But
except for when you try and experiment and all of a sudden you're using organic fertilizers and you're getting double the yield. They all, like, both of them like had a stroke, but I was like, Mom, just try it. Like, I'll pay for it. I'm like, we just need to do it. And it benefited, but I was just like, that it just needed a boost because like the soil, like you reach down and grab it and it's just like
what is this? Like,
Yeah. Just dry, dusty, and about to blow away.
yeah,
Is-
yeah. And it's not even being like tilled or anything. Like, it's not tilled whatsoever. And
No.
it's that bad. I couldn't imagine if they wanted to decide to till it one year to like
Mhm.
reseed.
No, if I was going to seed this, I would find somebody locally who had a seed driller,
Yeah, yeah,
and go at it that way.
yeah,
Because in what's happened is basically is as you cut the hay every single year, there hasn't been that little bit of nibbling browsing. There's been full clear cut. So with animals, you get a little bit of nibble, you get sloughing off of some of the root zone, the rhizosphere, and that becomes organic matter. And so all of
yeah,
a sudden you get bacteria, fungi, nematodes, microarthropods, and protozoa all starting to create glues within the soil that hold the soil together. And then you get that sort of cake-like
Great
soil we're all
aggregating.
looking for. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
When you don't have those animals that get the feeding that they do from a diverse array of crops, and this is one of the reasons why monocrops are problematic, because if you only have hay, you predominate the soil food web for just those types of plants like hay.
hmm,
And you don't get that diversity, and that diversity leads to a very dynamic type of soil. So single crop, clear cut once or twice, you're going to get this very, very unsupported soil that's going to be dry,
yeah,
damaged, and moving towards being totally desiccated, because at one point you're not going to be able to support a crop. You're going to get a big old wind that comes in, and welcome to 1930s Dust Bowl years.
yeah,
And this
Yeah.
yeah.
happens the world over.
That's
So
actually like how the field across the road is, like to the west.
mhm.
That field is, it brings over so much dust because of how they have it like set up.
Put
And
up
then last
put up
year
some
they
trees
did
and
put
collect it all.
yeah.
Well, it's true. It's true. Like trees do two things. Well, they do many things very well, but the two things in this situation they would do is they would grab that dirt and drop it. And the
Yeah.
second thing they would do is that wind, when it pushes against a tree, trees turn wind into wood. This is the amazing thing about trees.
Stronger.
When they're pushed against, they
Yeah.
grow, right? They've got this
Yeah.
life response that grows them, and you grow more wood. And they take
Yeah.
that and they put that down to their roots, and they shatter rock that way. Up comes
Yeah.
the wind, hits the tree transfers that vertically down into the root system, and they shatter rock via wind.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're taking your problem of your neighbor's inability to keep vegetation on their landscape into a plus, because you're capturing all of that and putting it into productive use on your landscape.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I, I have a question. In that bottom corner, that southwest corner on your property where the
Mhm.
roads come together and there's that high ridge, do you not get any water coming into the property from there too? Off
I mean,
off
I'm
the
sure we
roads?
do. I'm sure we do. That's all like woods out towards that southwest side. It just doesn't seem like it holds. Like there's no like stagnant or like areas that are more moist than the others that I've noticed.
I was just wondering if there's some way to collect the water off the roads. Like if you're going to put paddocks in
Yeah.
there and create like some sort of water source for the horses, but then it's also super high on the landscape too to be holding it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is making me look at this entire hayfield a totally different way. Because before I was just like, I have no background experience in this field. So for me, like coming in as a beginner, I was like, I don't know how to even look at this, like it's such a large space and all that's wanted is hay production. What can I do with it? And now I'm like, oh, so much.
What about, I'd say you should put a little apple orchards too, maybe in some of those tree belts, because horses love apples.
Yeah, so there is like a little bit of an orchard in, you can kind of see where the garden is. There's those two basswood trees and then there's the little trees right in between. Yeah. There's
okay.
There's like apples, some pears and stuff like that. But it's like it doesn't really produce a whole lot. So I was looking into like how could we expand it, kind of like you were saying, of putting in like the pastures. But then I was worried about not being able to utilize it like if I moved them into the field, because this one field in the southwest corner or that little square, I was like, oh, maybe I'll turn around and have that be a paddock, but we can open it up and we could hay it if we needed extra, like vegetation, or like extra hay to do. But down in there, it makes more sense to put those apple trees and the fruit trees and stuff like that, and then let the horses in. Yeah,
So
I feel like there's a lot I can do with this now.
So just two other ideas before we wrap up here, Kendra.
Yeah.
One is the roads generally are going to be crowned. So if this is our cross section, if we take this as like A to A apostrophe, this would be A to A apostrophe. This would be our crown. So the center of that road is going to be high usually. And then you've basically got a surface to capture off of. So generally in these rural areas, this water on both sides is going to shed. And so you've got basically Rogers Road from the top to the bottom here that's collecting a
Yeah.
certain amount of water over its
Yeah.
span. And generally it's 90% coefficient rate, which means that if 100 gallons fall in it, 90 are going to fall off of it and potentially have capture for you. So there is an opportunity potentially to capture that in and actually have that, let's say from this area down here. I'm going to do a little bit of erasing just so we can see a few things. And I'm going to take that out as well. So let's say that we've got an area here where that water comes down. It has the potential to take some of that road water and put it into productive use into, let's say, a swale system like this, if that makes sense. Because you can tie into the ditch. Now, sometimes you need to tie into the ditch further up, because once it gets down to that property level, the swale's up here and the ditch is down here. So sometimes you have to, tie it in here or something to divert it and bring it over, something of that nature.
Yeah.
The other thing which is really important, which Noah was starting to jump into, is fodder crops. And this is one of the major reasons why when we make swales, we go into tree cropping, is because both the shelter belts and the crops or the agroforestry strip rows that are put into the swales potentially could be fodder crops for the horses. So these are tree crops that they can browse themselves, or that you can cut and feed them over time. And it would create more resiliency within this design, because you're not just worried about annual production. Now you have perennial production that could potentially have high protein content for the horses as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this makes a ton of sense. I appreciate all of this
Oh,
because I was like, this whole field, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it besides like trying to protect it some more and building topsoil. Like, I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So generally, I just want to take a moment to kind of go over this again in terms of the concept, because this is the exact same thing we do if it's an acre urban lot or if this is a 25 or a 65. So first and foremost, we take a look at climate, we take a look at influences, we take a look at sectors, then we take a look at topography, which we brought in right away. Then we take a look at water flow and how we can put that water flow to productive use, always coming back to what is the client actually doing. And I want to make one important distinction. You said they were looking for hay production. Well, is that actually true? Or are they looking to feed their horses? They're looking to feed their horses.
And that makes more sense. Yeah. Because at
So,
the end of the day, that is what she's looking for.
So you always have to like dive underneath a client's wants. And this is where holistic decision making comes in. And you ask the question, well, what's actually behind the hay? You want to feed your horses, right? You want to have enough food for your horses and potentially have less inputs, have more yields, and have more resiliency over the lifespan. And hopefully those things are then regenerative for the landscape and the people. And instead of just this barren hayfield, this is actually an ecosystem that's functioning for the horses and for the client. So knowing that you're going to have resistance, you start with that and you go, hey, this is going to sound outlandish, but here's the pros of it. Here's are all the things why this might be a good idea. And we can do small little experiments to get you there. And that usually helps with the idea to become a reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, this would be like probably like a 10-year like plus goal, 100%. Just due to like financials and everything else or that can be put into the property. But this is awesome. I'm like, okay, now I have more work to do.
The last thing I'll say, Kendra, is that the potential for NRCS grants may force you into more of a digital output, only because if they see that digital output, that may increase your likelihood of getting a grant. So,
which makes sense. That's totally fine too. Like, cause I'm like, I am familiar with like computers and like different programs, just none of them corresponded with like this course to where like I could pull it off and jump back into it. It's been years since I've gotten out of school. So it was all like, okay, how do we do this again?
Totally. Is that helpful?
Yeah, extremely helpful. Thank you to both of you guys.
This is great. I love figuring stuff out. It's so fun.
That's what I like about like with like permaculture, but homesteading in general is I'm like, oh my gosh, the problem solving is like addicting.
100%.
I like the homeschool too, is because I feel like every time I go through one of the courses, I go through the course and then spend like another like 6 hours on YouTube and reading through courses and learning like all the things that like, here's an idea, and it's like, hey, down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Here's another idea. Okay, now we go.
Yeah, I know. I wrote like a whole like sticky note of like stuff. I'm like, oh, I need to look into that. Oh, I need to look into that. Haven't really like dabbled in that yet.
That's so much.
Awesome, folks. Well, thanks for the fun hour. This is the great thing about being the 1 or 2 people that show up for office hours. We get to dedicate the whole hour to you. So
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We'll see you in the next one.
All right,
Awesome.
bye.
Have a great week, everyone. See you later.
Yeah,
Bye now.
you too.